And I said, well, it's hard for me. I have my family and so on. He said, well, we'll bring your family here. We will get you appointed as a professor in the University of Panama, and in that way, you'll be able to bring your family down.
I see.
See? So I said, I'll let you know.
Ma told me about that.
Okay, so anyhow,
She told me about
so
that.
then I returned here, and I then, oh, incidentally, in all these places I've been
Yeah.
to, that I had been to, I had to send reports to the national office. You know, there was a monthly report that had to go in on everything I did. And so I would be submitting these reports, and they would be publishing the things that I was doing in the national program magazine that went all over to all of the clubs. So when I got to the national office, I was finished with Panama. I came back to the national office here, was sitting around, so my reputation preceded me.
I see.
See, so they, I was sitting around and they said, look, Simeon Kinsley, who is the national program director of the Armed Services Division, needs an assistant. So Rabbi Gordon, who used to be on the Pacific Coast, who was there, said, that's the guy. You should. So they appointed me his assistant. So I was the assistant national program director, and I had to travel around to visit the clubs, the USO clubs, and write material and stuff like that, and receive reports from the field and read them and stuff like that. So that's what I was doing until the war came to a close, while the USO clubs were still in operation because men were out in the field. But ultimately, there was a writing on the wall, and Simeon Kinsley had left to take on a job as director of a community center, and that catapulted me into his position. So I now became the national director, program director. Again, the Armed Services Division was being sliced down, and the director of the JWB Lecture Bureau left to work for the American Jewish Congress, so they moved me into that because that is a peacetime job.
I see.
So it had nothing to do with the Armed Services Division. Now I was serving the Jewish community centers. But the problem was that I had never had any experience in Jewish community centers. So I said, I really must backtrack a little bit.
You mean you couldn't organize alligator hunts?
No, you can't do that in Brooklyn. So I enrolled in the New York School of Social Work to study group work, and I did my in-service training at a Jewish community center to make up for that
I see.
lack. And that's how I got into the New York School and social work.
You worked for the JWB for 35 years or something like that?
37.
How much?
37.
Yeah,
37.
well, then while I was there, I recognized the fact that I was serving in a particular segment of the Jewish Community Center work, and that segment was the adult level. So therefore, after I finished with my social work schooling, I enrolled at Columbia to study adult education. And after I completed my work there, they changed the title. So now I became director of adult program.
Yes.
And part of that work. So
Is
that
where
was
you
all
got your PhD there?
Yeah. Right.
You got your PhD at Columbia for that
Columbia,
reason?
Right.
I see.
And then I had to write this thesis, and there was a lot of work involved in going out and doing all kinds of research work to go into this thesis. And I used to go out and visit various centers regularly, set up all kinds of programs, observe various things that were happening, and come to certain conclusions. And that was the end of that.
You won the Ford Fellowship as a result.
Oh yeah, while I was there, I became very active in the Adult Education Association of the United States, and the Adult Education Association of the United States had two parts.
Yes.
They had two parts. One was the segment that dealt with informal adult education, and the other formal. The formal adult education is what takes place in school systems. And that segment was called NAPSE, N-A-P-S-A-E, National Association for Public School Adult Educators. That's one segment. And the other segment was informal, YWCA, or the Salvation Army, the National Manufacturers Association, IBM, Adult Educators, Prison, Adult Educators, etc., etc. These were educators in the informal aspects of adult education. And so they formed the Council of National Organizations, so that all national organizations that had anything to do with adult education belonged. So the Jewish Welfare Board was one of those organizations. Then ultimately I became vice president of the Council of National Organizations. Now, one of the professors developed a Ford grant that provided money to take 10 adult educators, 5 from the United States, 5 from Canada, to go to Europe for 2 months to study adult education in Scandinavia, in Switzerland, in Italy, England, and in England. And so I was appointed, the organization appointed one person from the council, no, I think it was 2 people from the Council of National Organizations, and the others were from the public school adult education field, from the United States, and 5 from Canada. I think one was from the trade union movement in Canada.
And that's when you went to Europe?
And that's when I went to Europe for the first time.
What was that, in the 50s, 1950s?
Something like that. Yeah.
56.
I don't exactly remember the exact date. And that's when I went to Europe with this group. And that's a story unto itself.
Remember we got a call in Carmel from which country? Denmark? We called from, yes.
So in any event, what happened was, normally, see, my vacation was only for 1 month. But the vice president, the executive director of JWB felt it was an honor. He says, by all means, he says, 2 months is fine. So I went for 2 months, and we studied and presented a report to the Adult Education Association, which was published in the annals of their publication and so on. So that was that. And of course, there are many things that happened there, but we leave that out.
Okay. When you studied for your PhD, it must have been difficult having a full-time job and raising a family and
right.
also...
Well, the raising the family is a different department. I delegated, I believe in the delegation of authority to those people who are better equipped. Always delegate. So I delegated that to my wife. She had complete authority and responsibility. I also believe that the best form of supervision is indirect. That is where you do not issue orders, but you develop the potential of the individual to whom you have allocated the responsibility.
Wash your hands off.
That sounds good.
So that made it possible. Besides that, the kind of job that I had was related. It was related to the field in which I was working. So therefore, I was able to take time off as required. Not only that, the JWB paid the tuition. So it was all very easy.
I see. Okay. Now, we lived for 27 years at 196 Rockaway Parkway.
Oh, yes.
Now, during that time in which you worked for the Lecture Bureau, who were some of the celebrities and performers that you
worked with?
The famous ones.
Isaac Bashevis Singer was one, but you know, there is this Latin saying, sic transit gloria.
Yes.
And I am reminded of that every time I think of these so-called famous personalities that I worked with, who were great personalities in their day, but after they passed away, and after several years went by, nobody knew their names anymore. For instance, in my book, Maurice Samuel was a great celebrity. He was a great celebrity in the Jewish community.
Fantastic.
Every time he'd write a book, he'd send me a copy, and he was so much in demand as a lecturer. He was just amazing. And when he passed away, and he's buried in the same cemetery where my parents are, and I once organized on the date of his yahrzeit a visit to his grave, where we would read from his works. Advertised it. 2 people showed up. That is, 4 people, including
We were there.
Mom and I, and the Glasses, Irving and Lee Glass, they're Yiddishists. So they showed up, but if you mention his name today, you'd have to be an old person to be able to recognize who he was. Some people achieved a greater degree of prominence, like Theodore Bickel, who was still around, and
How about Oppenheimer? Didn't you?
no,
You,
no, but there was a guy like Howard Da Silva, who was well known in his day. He used to play a lot of minor roles, and many times I see something on TV, and he's in it. But or Herschel Bernardi, or Sam Levinson, the humorist, and so
Adler.
on. Celia Adler, and so on. These were well-known names in their day. I used to call up, many senators, Senator Morse of Washington.
Wayne Morse.
Yeah, Wayne Morse.
Pepper.
Javits? Did you?
Javits.
Senator Javits,
Pepper.
Claude Pepper. I remember also one day, we used to have regional field directors. And they'd come in and their responsibility was to move from center to center in certain regions and give them guidance and advice and so on, and report back to the national office on what was happening. And one day, one of them comes in and he says to me, he says, nothing phases you. He said, you got a call from one of our centers for Einstein. And sure enough, you called up Einstein. Or another guy said,
Did you get through?
he wasn't available. Or another guy said, you got a call for Justice William Douglas. And I put in a person-to-person call to Justice William O. Douglas. And he was on the bench. He had to leave the bench. It was a person-to-person call. He came down and he wasn't available. But as the guys would say, nothing phases me. I didn't care who it was. I would call him. Or, for instance, who's the guy who wrote Hawaii and...
Michener.
James Michener. I spoke to James Michener because he wrote The Source. And, that's great. Well, he said, I'm sorry. He says, I have a heart condition and I do not accept any dates. And once I called, who's the guy who wrote... Love Story, was it?
Siegel?
Yeah, Siegel.
Eric Siegel? Yeah. I called Eric Siegel right after he was catapulted into prominence. Called Eric Siegel. Are you available? So on. He says, I only accept lectures in one place, New Haven. And for one organization only, Hadassah there. I said, how come? He says, my mother is a member of Hadassah in New Haven.
It was Howard Fast.
Oh yeah, Howard Fast. I got to know. I visited him. He had a place in Ridgefield, Connecticut.
We were
I
at his
visited.
home.
We were at his home. Who else? There are other people.
My 11.
Well, my 11 is not that well known.
Oh, right.
But yes, but these are people, and who else?
Great writer.
Oh, there are others.
Oh.
I used to have.
Historians.
Arthur Cantor.
Mrs. Roosevelt, for example. I would invite her. She visited our club in Panama, I remember. But these are people who found a place in a file I remember one of my secretaries set up a special folder, and the title of this folder was No's, N-O apostrophe S, No's from Newsworthy People. And that file contained beautiful letters saying, I'm sorry. And the other day, I arranged for this symposium with these three ambassadors, the UN. They were surprised. Well, I said it was very simple. I wrote to 15 ambassadors, and out of the 15, I got 3. And that's the way you do it. You don't stop at anything. Doesn't matter who it is. Like right now, I'm getting ready to invite Justice Clarence Thomas. I want to set up a symposium with him on it. The subject of this is going to be, what's this? Professor
Hill?
Hill.
No?
no, not Professor Hill. No, the anti-Semitic City College professor.
Jeffries.
Jeffries. It's going to be called the Jeffries Farrakhan Carson Syndrome, Sociological and Historical Bases, or something like that. And what I'm going to have is an outstanding historian, sociologist, some representative of the black community, like Clarence Thomas, and so on. And these will all be panelists to discuss why. When you look at Jewish history and the support that we have given, and the integral part of our religion which is devoted to opposition to racism, and when you look at the Bible and the fact that we have so much, we have intermarriage with blacks and so on, in the Bible, and in the
Solomon, I think.
yeah, in Solomon's
Bathsheba.
yeah, well, also, there's a segment of the Bible which calls attention. The point is, however, that our whole history is a history like Abraham Heschel, Professor Heschel, marching with who's the great Martin Luther King in the Selma March. You know, all the Jews always supported these civil rights movements, and the NAACP is supported and was supported and funding by the Rosewalls and so on. So you ask yourself, why? And that is the thing that this panel
That sounds
will
like
be
a
discussing.
timely program.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Let me jump over to something else. That's the summer home that we had in Carmel, New York.
Never mentioned that.
Oh yes, that was let's see, what was
It was around 1953.
yeah, that's right.
7 years.
That came about as a result of the fact that here we had this family, and I didn't believe in sending kids off to camp because during the rest of the year, the children are going to school. The parents, middle-aged parents, are concerned with advancing their careers. As a result, they have little time to devote to their children. And so comes the summertime when the kids are free. What do the parents do? They ship them off to camp. So therefore, I felt a good thing would be to spend the summer with your children. So one summer we rented a cottage in White Lake.
Lake Plaza.
White Lake. We rented a cottage there.
Oh, it was awful.
That's right. And we went to White Lake. We spent a very interesting summer there and so on. So I felt that it would be a good idea if we had a place of our own that we go to regularly. We go to even in the fall or in the spring, weekends and stuff like that in the summer. So one day, a friend of mine, I spoke to a friend of mine, his name was Harry Kagan, and I said, I asked him whether he would want to accompany me to go out some places around here and look for a place. So we did. And We went out into Putnam County
Uh-huh.
with a real estate agent, and he showed us this place.
Well, I was especially interested in some of those construction projects because the
Well, what
the
happened?
summer home was hardly complete when we got there.
That's true. So, what we found was there were 4 fishermen's cabins, crude cabins, and on a 2-acre plot with an adjoining 16-acre plot. It was forested trees, the 16-acre plot. So, my brother-in-law, Ziedel, was interested in the idea. And Harry Kagan had a friend of his, a Mr. Pfeiffer, who was interested. So all 4 of us joined in this project. Mr. Pfeiffer also bought the 16-acre plot, which was completely wooded. And when we got there, we found that we had these 4 cottages. There was no running water, and there was electricity in the house, but of course there was no plumbing. There were no inside toilets. We had outhouses, and so on. And there was a central standing spigot there with water which came from a little reservoir which was fed by water from a spring and water running through a lead pipe underground that was hardly adequate. So we faced that, so I wrote to the superintendent of documents, and the Army put out a book on how to do plumbing, another little booklet on how to build sanitation equipment and so on. And so I proposed to the other members of the colony that we draw water from the spring, which was up on the hill in this 16-acre plot, way up on this hill, and that we lay pipe, 2-inch pipe, running right down to this little reservoir, and from this little reservoir, pipe it into everyone's home. Now, when we had to choose the cabins, we drew them by lots. And as it was, I drew a lot for the lowest cabin
I wanted
near the reservoir.
I wanted it.
And therefore, our water pressure was great. Whereas the others didn't have such a high water pressure. In any event, I decided that I was going to install plumbing myself. The others eventually did, but they brought in plumbers to do it. But I decided I was going to do the plumbing myself. So I bought plumbing tools, pipe threader,
They wanted
cutter.
the view from the mountain. They selected the
So in any event, I bought all this equipment, and I ordered 1/2-inch pipe, and I started to draw water into this little bungalow. And I bought a water heater, and I bought a toilet, and I bought a septic tank, and so on, and all the drainage, piping and whatnot,
shower.
and the shower, and so on. And everything was ultimately installed. And having done all that, and having an A personality, I said, now what else can we do? So I bought a lot of woodworking tools. All these tools, by the way, were hand operated. We didn't have any electrically operated tools.
Is this where you first developed an interest in working with wood?
That's right. So then I remember this. I wanted to build a concrete walk from the to the cabin from this parking place where we parked the car. So I said to my son Jim, I call him Jim for short. His name is Jay. And so I asked him, I said, listen, I need your advice on how to lay out this thing. And he said to me, listen, he said, if you want me to help you, say so straight away. But don't ask me how to work it out and so on, because what you really want is me to help you. So here I was trying to work some kind of method of involving him in a group enterprise using the devices and techniques I had learned at school, and it didn't work. But in any event, we got this done, this concrete walk done, and then we went into the task of building a log cabin. Now, this was a big enterprise. I got
Scary.
permission from Mr. Pfeiffer. I bought a two-man lumber saw, two-man operated lumber saw, and we went up into the woods, and I had an axe, and you know there's a specific way to cut a tree so it falls in the direction you want it to fall, and we learned all that. I also had a book on log cabins, and we decided to build a cabin Maine style, M-A-I-N-E. That is, the state of Maine had developed a special way of building a log cabin, and that's the technique we used. And it was a job getting the logs down the hill, and what we did is we used the logs, the first logs, as rails. And we laid them out as a series of rails all the way down the hill, and the successive logs would then roll down these parallel rails, and then ultimately we picked up the rails that were way up at the top, put them on, and we finally got all the logs down the hill.
Right.
Then we had to shave them and so on, and it was a whole enterprise. But I believe that that log cabin still stands only because it would be such a tough job to get rid of it.
Oh, could I interject?
Hold 1 second. All right, go
All
ahead.
right,
Yeah.
camera.
A camera. When Daddy cut down the tree and he shaved it down, he took down the branches and the leaves and everything. By the time he got it down and he put it up on the on the foundation, he ran up the steps on the porch and he practically collapsed on the hammock. And he was breathing very heavy because he worked in the sun. It was very hot that day. And Grandma Freeman was visiting at the time, and she said to me, you know, seeing Daddy that way, she said to me, Ruthie, why do you let him do it?
Okay.
That's
Oh, and Grandma
Okay.
Freeman lived now, she'd see how much I let him do.